Hello, folks, and welcome to Totally Tanked, the tankiest podcast in Tankville. It's Saturday, the 18th of January, 2025, and this is episode 66. My name is Rob, and I'm joined by...
Hi everyone, I'm John, and welcome to the show. Now, if you want an excellent Totally Tanked t-shirt, beer coaster, coffee mug, or cool hat, head over to redbubble.com and search for Totally Tanked. Also, if you like the show, and why wouldn't you if you come this far, for God's sake, smash those like and subscribe buttons. We need all the help with the algorithms we can get because, as you might have noticed, we're not really adjacent to much other content out there. And now, before we get into the amazing story of the British World War II Crusader tank, I just want to say a big hello to everyone who called us cucks and soy boys for talking the last episode about the military implications of climate change. As the US moves to steal Canada and Greenland and the ashes keep on burning in Los Angeles, some of the duller knives out there might start to realise that not only is climate change real, but some real bastards are planning to make a ton of money by making it all worse, and those bastards are in charge.
Look, I'll add in, it's the same people stoking believing the threat of China to Australia, saying we need to harden the country's defence, civil and cyber infrastructure. And you know what would be a great way of paying for all that? Taxing all the coal and gas that the Australian government gives away to Chinese and American mining companies. Seriously, Australia pays overseas mining companies to take our coal and gas so that we can then buy it back from them.
Now, speaking of bastards in charge, let's return to our old friend William Morris, the Viscount Nuffield, who, you know, we really first got to know him in our infamous Cromwell episode, one of our most viewed episodes of last year. And he was also the genius, and this is the annoying thing, he was a genius. Everything he did in life he succeeded at, except the crucial wartime production when Germany was in a chance to win. And let's not forget, he was the biggest single funder of the British Fascist Party.
And hello to Brandon Makestuff, Tasman, Hans Vormhall. Welcome to the stream. First time here. Ra, Tasman, and Gauntlet. Woo, I'm back. New BS. Hey, guys, from Melbourne. Andrew from Melbourne, and John Scholler from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, John.
Okay, so welcome to the team. It's good to have so many people on the stream, and... I hope we're sounding good. We've got new little microphones.
John's very proud of his new microphones. So call out if we're getting any technical issues.
Tell me how pretty we sound, please. Anyway.
Or if there's any issues with what's coming through. Anyway, the Crusader. It's not a Covenanter. It's not a Centaur. It's not a Cavalier, Cromwell, or a Comet, but it is a cruiser. The Cruiser Mark I was the A9. The Cruiser Mark II was the A10, which started as the Tank Cruiser Heavy Mark I. Then it gets complicated as you get into the Tank Cruiser Mark III A13 Mark I, then the Tank Cruiser Mark III A13 Mark II, then the Tank Cruiser Mark III A13 Mark III, which became the A13 Mark III Cruiser Mark V Covenanter, which was being built at the same time as the A15 Cruiser Mark VI Crusader Mark I, which then gets to be the Crusader Mark II and Crusader Mark III. And to top it all off, there's the German captured version, the Panzerkampfwagen Mark VI Cruiser Panzerkampfwagen.
Cruiser with a K.
Panzerkampfwagen Mark 6 746. Wow. And we thought the US and their M3s and M4s were overused and complicated. So, it's a little bit of a mess there.
Now, Hans is asking about the beer tube. All 80 ounces of it. There's a whole six-pack in here, and we're going to drink it all in the first half.
These are our warming up beers.
Yeah, we didn't even touch this one. It's coming. Frankly, the world is such a grim place that it's going to take a lot of heavy drinking to get through everything we've got to talk about.
We're experienced.
In the second half, we're going to...
Don't worry, Hans, we're very experienced drinkers. We know what we're doing. Right? We can drink and podcast at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's generally thought that the Covenanter was named after the 17th century's Covenanters Scottish religious group, and the Crusader was after the 12th century Crusaders. But there is another possibility that they were both named after local Christian, British Christian boys groups that were prominent in the 1930s, being the Covenanters and the Crusaders.
Which were named after the Scottish Covenanters and the medieval Crusaders.
This is where the British cruisers started with their naming convention tanks starting with C, which then followed on to their MBTs of Centurion, Chieftain and Challenger. Which,
when you do something like this for a century, which it's getting on, it starts to make it very easy. Someone says it's a Challenger, okay, it's a British tank. So there is something to be said for keeping your naming conventions for a while, assuming that your vehicles are still fitting within a functional doctrine, which is a whole other question.
All right. Now, all the fun stuff. The stats. Type. It's a cruiser tank. It's not an infantry tank. It's not a light tank. It's not a heavy tank. It's not a medium tank. It's a cruiser
It's an attempted horse replacement.
Yep.
It was not good doctrine.
It was in service from 41 to 49. It fought in World War II, plus a couple of other little side notes, which we'll get onto later. Designed from 1939 and 1940, produced from 1940 to 1943. They built 5,300 of them.
5,300 of this.
Yep. Of this. All right. Mass, it was 18 to 20 tons, depending on what you had in it and when it was built. 20 feet 8 inches long, 9 foot 1 inch wide, and 7 foot 4 inches high. So not very high, very low, which was one of its saving graces, I guess.
It was. There are, annoyingly, with this tank, quite a few really good design elements thrown in with the really bad design elements, and they got the low height. It did come at a cost that the engine was redesigned badly into it, and that exacerbated its cooling issues and its air filtration issues. And we'll talk way more about the Nuffield Liberty engine as we get through this as well. But cramming into that low form factor did make a largely dysfunctional tank. But the low form factor was great. We love that. It was a great looking tank. It looked amazing.
And look, we'll give a shout out to the Covenanter a number of times during the episode, but we're not doing it at this point in time. But we will reference it just because, well, there were worse tanks than the Crusader, and there's one right there.
Although you'd be hard pressed in a quick ID flashcard contest to correctly distinguish your Crusaders from your Covenanters.
Yeah.
I mean, the big one is the radiators on the front of the Covenanter.
And 4 versus 5 rotary wheels.
Quick flashcard idea would be like, is there a radiator on the front?
Yeah. Alrighty. The crew of the Mark 1 and 2 had 4 or 5 positions within it, which was the loader, the hull gunner, and gunner, commander, and the driver. And then in the Mark III, they dropped that down to 3, which was just the gunner, the driver, and the commander. The poor old commander was also the loader. Yes,
and he had to face backwards to load, which is not good for fighting a tank.
And he was not loading the little banana-shaped 2-pounders. He was loading the nice big 6-pounder rounds,
which is a much bigger round. I mean, it's what, 57 mils, something like that.
Yep, 57 mils. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Then we get on to the armour. The Mark 1's armour was only 40 mils. Then with the Mark 2s, they've upped it to 49 mils. This is on the front hull and on the turret. And then on the Mark 3s, they put it up a little bit more to 51 mils of armour.
Let's just briefly talk about the turret armour, because shot traps are often overstated, particularly in modern tanks where the hypersonic rounds things don't deflect the way they did back in World War II. But this tank, it's made out of shot traps, and it was actually ricocheting rounds down into the soft top armour. It was a problem. And then it's got this flat-facing turret in an otherwise angled turret. I mean, it's almost like, a Nazi designed it to lose the war for Britain.
And there were other problems with the angled turret, and that's
and it's all riveted. So anytime it gets hit, spalling hazards.
We'll get on to the riveting. So anyway, so the main armament was for the Mark 1 and Mark 2s was the 2-pounder, as we were saying before,
which was a great gun in 1939 and an okay gun in 1940, and it was not good enough in 1941
and 42. Which is when the Germans started putting hardened plate armor on their front of their tanks, and the 2-pounder rounds would start shattering as they hit the hardened armor.
And it did force British tank crews had to get insanely close to be effective with the 2-pounder. And when you've got no armor on your tank and you have to get really close to be effective, you're in a very bad situation. And that doesn't even start to get across why a 40mm cannon couldn't have a high explosive round, because the Bofors gun existed at this time, which had a 40mm high explosive fast firing round that is so good it's still being used on CV90, which we did in the last episode. But yeah, anyway.
All right. Hello to Alexander Vlad and Jay Bowser. Welcome, gents. Then we move on to the Mark III Crusader, which had the 6-pounder gun.
Much better gun.
Yep.
Shouldn't have been in that turret. Shouldn't have been on that tank. But
it was the anti-tank gun. It was because the Cruiser Mark 7 had been delayed, and so they needed to get out a better cruiser tank with a better gun, and that's what they ended up with. So they said, you know what, we're just going to shove it into the Mark III Crusader and go from there.
And let's also remember that it was the 6-pounder, which its development history, it could have been a hero weapon of the war, but they delayed its introduction in the panic after the fall of Dunkirk to keep production lines running with the existing 2-pounder. Probably a sensible decision in that particular moment. But it did mean that the 6-pounder never really got rolled out when and where it should have. And that then led to the problems that we've talked about with the Cromwell, where because of the complete failures of the Cromwell production process, the gun that was meant to go in it that eventually ended up in Comet couldn't fit in the turret. And also, remember, Viscount Nuffield was all in the middle of this stuff. And so they had to use a bored-out 6-pounder to try and get a 75mm high explosive round. Sorry. Anyway,
but whereas
let's move on.
but when the 6-pounder guns got rolled out, not only just for tanks, but also as an anti-tank gun for the infantry, they were very effective as for what they were, and they were especially against the German Panzer IIIs, 4s, 1s, and 2s. Not so much against the Tigers and Panthers, but that's what happens. And welcome to Half-Life ABC.
He thinks we sound much better. Yay!
Thank you. So with the
and sorry, just Hans wants to know if we can get the beer tube mic'd up. No, we're not miking up the beer tube. You will get can rips later when we get to the beer review. But yeah, so second half, hang around for that.
All right. Both the 6-pounder and the 2-pounder were shoulder controlled by the gunner, so they could accurately fire on the move if the gunner knew what they were doing.
Which required very precise balancing. And with the 2-pounder, which was still a heavy weapon, but was manhandleable, that would be fine. The problem is, even in a well-balanced 6-pounder, it's a massively heavier gun, and if the tank's moving up and down, the gunner's shoulder is going to, just through inertia, going to be dealing with...
They would be very good at squats, let's just put it that way.
Yeah, very fast squats that they're forced into. Yeah, there's a reason why 120mm guns today do not rest on the gunner's shoulder.
Doesn't matter how well balanced they are, it's still a lot of mass. All right. They also had a secondary armament of 1 or 2 Baser machine guns.
Now, this is where we probably need to talk about the auxiliary turret.
The auxiliary turret. So they wanted to have a bow gunner in it, but they said, with this gun, we can't really, in the position of the front of the hull, we can't really put it into the hull because the gunner wouldn't then have enough room for the gunner to be sitting behind it. Sorry, the bow gunner to be sitting behind it. So what we'll do, we'll build him a nice little, his own nice little turret, put the machine gun in that, and then he can sit there all by himself in this cramped little turret. With
incredibly hot, cramped little turret.
So that when he fired off the machine gun, it would then fill with fumes of cordite and gun oil and everything else, and in the desert in 45-degree heat, he would then pass out. So the crews very quickly said, "Yeah, nah," and pull the little turret off
and plate it over it, which is a reasonably big job. That's not a small afternoon in the workshop.
You wouldn't need that much.
Anyway,
I mean, they were doing enough work on the tank in the workshop anyway. They said that's an extra 5 minutes work because they were having to repair these things every 5 minutes,
fixing the engines over and over again.
Yep.
So the auxiliary turret was generally considered a miserable failure. We will probably touch on Laserpig's defense of the Crusader. He did make a very good point that a lot of British tank design in this period was, let's put more turrets on, let's take some turrets off, let's put more turrets on, let's take some turrets off. And the Crusader...
Some of the ones with the 2 turrets forward, 2 machine gun turrets forward, a main turret with a 75, a 37, and a machine gun, and then another 2 turrets to the rear of the tank. That's
going
crazy.
to be independent.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah,
it's crazy stuff.
I mean, the Russians were doing similar things. Yeah. There was a moment in the 20s when they were like, "Hey, why not have more turrets? Wouldn't that be good to shoot at lots of things?" And it was like, "No, you're better off having more tanks if you want to shoot at lots of things at the same time. But what you want your tank to do at any given moment is fire very accurately where it's meant to be firing."
All right. The engine, the Nuffield Liberty for the Marks 1 and 2, and then they went into the Mark IV Liberty engine for the Mark III Crusader.
Now, when you talk about the Liberty engine, you got to distinguish. In 1917, the Liberty engine was a very fine aircraft engine, and for an aircraft engine in 1917, where we're talking flight times of an hour tops. They called them 20-minuters because they didn't live very long.
That's only from Blackadder.
Yeah, but so the point is, your Nuffield Liberty, it was designed to be all the bolts tightened up, go up in a plane, fly around for an hour, come back down, and then the mechanics would tighten all the bolts up again. Viscount Nuffield bought the rights to this engine and then wanted to use it in everything because he had the production rights. And Britain had a problem with it didn't have enough small lightweight engines, and all the Merlins were going into aircraft. Quite a defensible decision, but it meant that they were lacking good engines. And a 340 horsepower lightweight engine from Nuffield, who was a famous car manufacturer, made very good cars.
Tractors.
The tractors weren't so good, but from the Morris Group, the MGB is still one of the most beautiful sports cars ever made, and it was made very affordably as well. So young men throughout the world, including my dad, including lots of people you went to the Defence Force Academy with, would have one of these things. They were great.
It was a thing.
Point is, your Nuffield Liberty as a tank engine in the 1940s was desperately out of date, didn't have a consolidated engine block. Now, yes, the radial engines didn't either, but the radial engines were much better engines. So it could literally vibrate itself apart, which comes back to, it was a 1917 aircraft engine where the mechanics would tighten everything up with a torque wrench and put it out the door. But if it was rumbling around in the desert for days at a time, horrible things are going to start happening.
Well, we'll get a nice quote about that later on. But anyway, so it's when the Mark IV Liberty engine got put into the Mark III Crusader, it was much improved. They figured out a lot of the issues with it.
Yeah, it's a classic thing. An apologist for any vehicle will say, "Oh, well, when it got to the later engine marks, it was just fine." It's like, well, it was too late.
By that stage, it was outdated as a gun tank, and everything else had bypassed it. It was still useful as a rear echelon tank, doing things and towing around 17-pounders, which was probably its best use of the war. But anyway,
the Gauntlet's just asking. So the 3-slit turret on the
Marks 1 and 2.
Yeah, was one, there was a machine gun in there, and the other was the gunner's sight, which was quite clever in that the Germans, looking at a tank coming over the horizon, don't know what slit's doing what for shooting at it purposes. But,
so that's the mantlet on the Marks 1 and 2 Crusaders, but when they went to the Mark III Crusader...
with a much bigger gun.
And they put in a new mantlet, and that had the Bayes machine gun on the gunner's side, so it swapped sides. And the commander would then have to load the Bayes machine gunner over the top of the 6-pounder. So he had a real shit time of trying to, excuse my language, of trying to load the machine gun over the top of the 6-pounder while he's trying to do everything else, as well as loading the 6-pounder and commanding and getting on the radio, because the loader used to be the radio operator as well.
Now, I just want to note we're in uncharted territory. We've got way more concurrent viewers than we've ever had before. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. All right. The transmission was the Nuffield constant mesh 4-speed and reverse.
Synchromesh was reasonably advanced for that era. Yeah. I can remember when I was learning to drive cars in the late 80s, Synchromesh was still considered reasonably advanced in the cars people would let me drive. But
then how come it took you so long to get your license? Maybe that was the problem. All right. Suspension, it was the Christie helical spring with 5 road wheels. Count them, 5, which is more than the other cruisers. Started with aluminium wheels, but they changed to steel and rubber as aluminium was required for airplane production. It had very narrow British tracks, but supposedly they bogged a bit less than other tanks.
I think the bogging less is more a function of actually having a bit of power-to-weight ratio. So you can't get bogged if you don't stop. I think that was where that was going, because the tracks were dreadfully tiny and winky, and the British with their thin tracks were working on the basis that they knew they had a horsepower problem, and bigger tracks, meaning more rotational mass and a greater weight of the tank, were a problem. Some tanks you could, 10 tons could be taken up just by the tracks. So, and hello, Obliteron from Oregon.
Hey.
Yeah.
Welcome. All right, where we're at, fuel, it had 110 imperial gallons, not just any old common gallons.
No, these are the good ones, the imperial ones. Yeah.
No, it's like imperial pints, they're bigger and better. Along with 3 external fuel, that was 3 internal fuel tanks, giving a range of 140 miles on road or 65 miles cross country.
Which is fine.
Which is much more than all the other tanks going around at that point in time. So it was actually, one of the things, it was good, and it was go a long way and it could do it fast, because it had a maximum speed of 26 miles per hour or 15 miles per hour off road. So it was faster than a lot of tanks. It was and had enough fuel to keep going a lot further. So when we were doing the Stuart, they would always run out of fuel before before they could catch the Panzers running away from them. Whereas the Crusader could keep up.
If it had been a reliable tank,
yes, that's the issue.
It would have been in the adequate, moving into the good category. I would say the crew ergonomics was still terrible, and you've got the turret ring issues and the weird angled turret was designed. It did create a roomier turret for a small turret ring, but they really should have done what the Soviets got to in the 1950s, where you just make it a dome all the way down to the body of the tank.
Yeah. All right. Then had the Wilson epicyclic steering within it. So basically, it was just the sticks. Design and development. All right. After Nuffield had designed the A-16 heavy cruiser tank with Christie suspension in 1938, the Army was looking for a lighter and cheaper tank to build. To meet the need, the A-13 Mark III cruiser tank, aka the Cruiser Tank Mark V Covenanter, was designed, and Nuffield was asked to take part in the production of the Covenanter in 1939, but he decided, essentially all the engineers in his workshop decided to work on their own design of the A-13. And they were still provided design work for the Covenanter's turret, using the same turret as what the Crusader ended up with. This new tank was adopted as the A-15 Tank Cruiser Mark VI Crusader. It's often referred to as an improved version of the Covenanter, but instead it was actually a parallel design.
Yeah, with sharing the turret. And I just love that for a tank, it was never designed to go to North Africa, and that's important to bear in mind.
That'll get said later on.
Sure. But
he never reads the script.
Yeah, I'm just letting you have your freedom, Rob. But sometimes we got to move around it. What I wanted to say was, for a tank so inappropriately named to operate in Muslim countries, the British just had no conception or care for what the locals would think of a tank called Crusader.
Starts with a C. Of course, they love it.
Yeah.
Croissant. Remember, we get a tank called Croissant. They would never do that.
Remember, the croissant is a celebration of the Siege of Vienna. But yeah.
Supposedly, I've heard other stories that the French actually came up with it before Vienna, and there was anyway.
But anyway, they made crescents to say, "Ha, we're beating up the Muslims, nom nom nom, eating your symbol."
Anyway, both tanks for the Covenant and the Crusader were ordered without prototypes being built, but the pilot Crusader was ready 6 weeks before the first Covenanter. The Crusader was built with 5 road wheels on each side to improve the weight distribution in the tank. That weighed almost 20 tons when it was first came out, instead of the 14 tons of the previous cruisers. The Crusader also had a different engine, steering system, and conventional cooling system with radiators in the engine compartment rather than on the front of the hulls.
As in the Covenanter, which is no other tank has ever done that because it's a bad idea.
The Christie suspension provided a comfortable ride and decent stability for firing on the move, which is what a lot of other tanks could not do. So that by having it in the shoulder mount, you could actually fire on the move, and because they would traverse the turret to the point of aim, and then it was up to the gunner to then raise or lower the. They didn't have to go left or right with the gun; they just had to raise or lower to actually set the firing line. So. The shoulder-mounted gun control was useful for that, but as you said, it would take a good gunner to be able to use it effectively.
And you just no one else did it, and the British didn't seem to get an enormous advantage out of it. So it sounds good on paper, and it's a bit like being able to fire on the move basically up until the 1970s when fire control computers became available. Firing on the move just wasn't actually a great tactic. Well. The great tactic for all tanks is sitting covered in camouflage, waiting until you see the enemy and then whacking them without them knowing that you're there. That is always the best plan.
I like the idea of naming a tank Cheese. Yep. That's a good one.
Yep.
All right. Some wonderful comments that jumped out at me when I'm doing this research from David Fletcher and the Chieftain were, no one designing the Crusader had any idea it would be working in a desert environment. Another one was, if it ran for 36 hours without some strange and terrible trouble, it was considered a miracle. What its faults were, the desert exacerbated and turned it into a disaster. Now, I think those summed up the life of the Crusader pretty well.
I think it's just worth, it's incredibly worth mentioning. Everyone who talks about Crusader talks about it for whatever reason, and I like to think it's because Viscount Nuffield was a traitor. The air filter was placed on the back fender where all of the dust that the tracks were kicking up entered it immediately and choked the air filters, which then led to everything failing, which fed into the fact that the engine had been compressed down into this low form factor, which had exacerbated all the ventilation and cooling issues.
And thanks, Brandon, for pointing out the video footage in the background is really enjoyable. I thought so too.
We will talk about the video footage just before we intro. We've got the halftime break is going to be a whole bunch of archival footage, and why the Australian War Memorial has these archival footage is worth exploring, but we'll get there in a bit.
All right, so yes, it had a lot of bolts. You can see them all over the place, but that was for the hardened outer armour layer that would stand up to armour-piercing rounds and couldn't be welded or shaped, which then had an inner layer of softer armour that was welded and designed to prevent spalling. So it wasn't as bad for spalling as you'd expect.
They're basically describing composite armour there as well.
But pretty much. That's pretty much what it was. So they with the hardened armour, they couldn't do anything with it except bolt it on, and with the softer armour, they could weld it and shape it and do whatever they liked with it. So it had the two lines of armour to do that. As the rounds got bigger throughout the war and more HE rounds, you needed bigger bolts as the smaller bolts would snap, which is why in the Cromwell you see these great big 6-inch wide bolt heads being put upon on the front of the tank. When attempting to add cast armour plates to existing tanks with lots of smaller bolts, the cast armour worked well, but the bolts holding in place kept shearing off. So basically that's why they had to go to these great big 2-inch bolts to throw on the front of the turrets for the British tanks as they try to add more armour onto them.
Medi's joined us. Hello, Medi. It's always good to see you.
Good too. The V-shaped turret sides increased the room inside the tank and allowed the installation of a larger gun on a small turret ring when they finally got to it. But it did create a nasty shot trap from rounds deflecting from the turret down into the top of the hull.
Now, I just want to briefly touch on this. There's this thing that goes around that the British decided there was a maximum size of a turret ring they could have because they had to fit all the tanks down the railway template, which basically the smallest railway tunnel in Britain was dictating the size of their tanks. And later in the war, and when they eventually got around to designing Centurion, they just said, stuff it. But what they should have done earlier was say, do we actually need this tank to go through the narrowest railway tunnel in Britain? Because a hell of a lot of Britain was actually designed with Brunel's broad gauge and were much wider tunnels. And there was just a bit of a failure of imagination on the part of the railways. And also, frankly, the railways might have needed to move their templates and broaden things rather than saying, oh, the tanks all need to be skinny.
Long and skinny,
yeah,
and like Tog 2.
Yeah, some failures of imagination is what we're talking about there, but yeah.
All right, it was also one of the first tanks with the turret basket, so the crew could stay in place rather than having to watch their feet when the turret was traversing. The hatch next to the driver's vision block wasn't for extra visibility, so when you look at the driver's area, there's a nice little slit for him to look through while they're driving away, and then there's another larger block that you could open up, and that was actually his pistol port to blaze away with his Webley Mark IV and give Jerry what for, so he didn't miss out on the action. Huzzah!
Huzzah! Yeah, pistol ports. Pistol ports in
for the driver,
whose both hands are very busy.
He was there, but realistically, they could open that up, and he could stick his head into that and actually have a better look around than looking through the vision slits that he did have. So, who knows? Anyway, we know that the 2-pounder was as a good gun for 1940 and gave the Italians what for, but without HE, it was shown up by the cunning Hun.
I just want to touch on that because some people don't know this. The issue is that if the enemy's firing at you with an anti-tank gun, which has got a screen, but it's low and it's into the ground. Firing a solid armour-piercing round at it, even if you hit it, you're likely just to hit the screen and the crew say, whew, that was loud, and keep firing at you. Whereas if you hit an anti-tank gun with a high explosive round, that's good night crew. And time again, British tanks were destroyed by concealed German anti-tank guns, and they just had no way to neutralize
They
them.
couldn't get close enough to use their machine guns to actually suppress the anti-tank guns.
But even that's what that shield is actually good for, is keeping machine gun fire out of your position. Yeah.
All right. So it was good for against the Italians, but the cunning Hun came up with these cunning ploys of retreating, luring the British cavalry who like to charge forward after retreating enemies and then lure them onto their anti-tank guns. But the close support tanks.
Sorry, I just clearly want to go back there. British doctrine was incredibly clear that if the enemy was retreating, they had to follow them.
That's what the cruiser tanks are for.
Yeah. But it was close to being it was definitely a court-martialable offence if you didn't follow the retreating enemy, which in wartime could lead to execution.
Shoot straight, you bastards!
Yeah,
Don't make a mess of it.
Yeah. But so the British officers had to stay as close as they could, and you get to Patton's doctrine of grab the enemy by the belt buckle. Once we know where they are. Don't let them get away. So it's not just the British with this idea, but the Germans knew that, that all they had to do was flirt some tanks out in front of the British and then run away, and the British would chase them down, and then the German anti-tank guns would open up from ambush positions all around. So a little bit more flexibility and saying, I think it's a trap, sir.
But it took 18 months for them to figure this out.
Well, it took a very long time, and a lot of diligent, brave people died because they lacked the flexibility to deal with this.
Anyway, getting back to the close support tanks. They had a 3-inch mortar, and they did have HE for their guns, right? But it was designated to fire smoke mortars in support of infantry rather than HE for when attacking. So why when you have no effective HE in your 2-pounder, do you not let the close support tanks provide, close support, providing, firing in
more than a smoke round. Why not put an HE round? But it's worth noting that a smoke round generally means white phosphorus. And it is extremely unpleasant to be inside the cloud that's generated by that.
Look, it was possibly a lack of range issue, but the one article I could find on the close support mortar range said at 25 degrees, which was the max elevation, they had a range of 2,200 yards for HE and 1,700 for smoke. So they had more than enough range. From what I read, they had more than enough range to be an effective HE round, and they carried 30 HE and 60 smoke. So you're really wondering why. Yeah, anyway.
So it comes back to, why didn't they just put a Bofors gun in, and then they would have had the same armament as CV90 today. Exactly the same gun was there.
All right, the road wheel springs were found between the inner and outer armour plates on the side of the hulls, which made it very hard to work on them. So yes, they were slightly better protected, but if they did break...
Well, that was Christie's suspension, that it took up an enormous amount of interior space, and was incredibly hard to service as well, because if they had to get into it, as opposed to the more common late war British tanks and the American tanks, they all had their bogies on the outside. Yeah, okay, the bogies are exposed to damage, but they're big, heavy pieces of steel. Whereas
they're very easy to swap in and out.
Yeah, whereas but when you use the Christie style, and the Soviets used Christie as well on the T-34, so they're not alone here, and obviously it was an American invention. There's a lot to be said for Christie. It's not a bad suspension system. Torsion bars are obviously the best, but there were some problems with it that made maintenance even more piggish, because it's a big job to not just take the wheels off to get out, but you've got to take the armour plate off as well.
Yep. So yes, they were slightly protected, but when it did break, it was a lot of mucking around to get to able to get to them, which also decreased the inner tank volume significantly, which is why you then needed to have the wider turret above to be able to have some more room inside. The engine fan cooling system was chain driven, so either the chain would wear out or the fan would break, or both. Sand got into the coolant water, which got into the water pump, which then stopped working, causing more cooling issues. The engine air intake, as John was saying, was right over the rear tracks, so it would suck sand and dust into the engine, and it leaked oil and water all over the place.
Now, I want to come back to friend of the show, Lottie the Tank Whisperer, who is on YouTube and is well worth following, because she does nuts and bolts tank maintenance today, on camera. It's pretty cool. One of her videos, she has pointed out that if you walk through a tank museum that has running tanks, and you...
They'll all be leaking oil.
No, Her point is that you look at which ones have drip trays underneath them in the tank museum because they don't want the oil linking on their nice polished concrete floors. It's the British tanks. That's how you spot the British tanks, is they've got the tray underneath them.
And welcome to the kilted privateer from the Pacific Northwest. Look, there are also severe limitations from the tank itself, starting with the poor handling in African ports, repairs, premature use of their train and tracks because of the lack of transportation infrastructure, and then the conception problems in the field. For example, the lower part of its angled turret acted like a lever at each shell impact, so if there was a round going off beside it, then it would catch the side of the angled turret and dislodge the turret from the mounting of the turret ring. Or a vulnerable hull spot above the ammunition racks, where
that's not what you want.
if red hot metal fragments penetrated, they triggered a fire.
Although it is worth noting that they actually had quite an advanced ammunition compartmentalization in this tank that was ahead of its time.
For the Mark III, right?
Okay.
So the Mark 1 and 2s, which did most of the fighting in North Africa, number 3s turned up and taken all the glory. But anyway, before then, there was a lot of damage done. There are also issues with the engine overheating, oil leaking, and problems with the cooling system, filter, and caused... something broke. John broke something.
I've stuffed it up. Keep talking, Rob.
Oh, my goodness.
Entertain them.
I'm going to start dancing in a second. We're going to get to do a lot on the Australian 9th Division because, yes, they did have Crusaders. They're the ones who held out in Tobruk, and then they also took Damascus and all sorts of fun stuff. We'll get into them. We're just about to get into the actual conflicts that the tank was involved in.
World War II.
World War II.
You might have heard of it.
North Africa is where the tank had most of its... well, I wouldn't say glory, but some glory and a lot of rubbish. Anyway. Hang on, too far.
Okay.
All right. Going up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. No, keep going up. There we go. Stop. Up. Let me drive. All right. They were also delivered with very few spare parts, so the tanks were in for repair would be cannibalised for parts to repair other tanks because the poor Remy would not have enough things, and said, right, we're going to cannibalise this one to repair these 4. The original bow gunner turret was horrible. If the crewman fired off the gun, he'd be passing out from the fumes and the heat of the gun in his tiny enclosed space, so it was soon removed by crews as unnecessary. This then made a nasty shot trap for the driver for any rounds coming in from the left/near/passenger side of the tank, as his little flat side compartment no longer had an armoured turret in the way. Crews were reluctant to take it out. It was so bad. But it was the first British tank decided to upgun to the 6-pounder, increasing its anti-tank capabilities significantly.
Well, the 6-pounder is a better gun than the 2-pounder, enormously, but at the same time, losing the loader and forcing the commander to face backwards while he's loading the gun made the commander's position untenable and the tank fundamentally useless.
It might have worked if you weren't a 6'5" chieftain.
Yeah, but it's still just a bad design. Two-man turrets, they're better than one-man turrets, but the correct number in the turret is 3, unless you've got an autoloader.
Yeah. The 6-pounder version also moved the coax baser from the right, the loader side, to the left, the gunner side, as the loader was removed, with the work to be done by the commander, who then had to reach over the top of the baser to load the 6.
I reckon the commander might have told the gunner to load his own.
I don't. Who knows? Anyway, however, the Crusader was also the first tank to get armoured ammo storage bins to stop the ammo blowing up and killing the crew, which then, from late 1942, giving you longer-lasting experienced tank crews. Pity about the poor buggers who went before.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, conflicts, World War II. But it was also there in the Suez Crisis and the Six-Day War. But we'll get onto those.
Okay.
So World War II was the main thing. The significant operations. Operation Battle Axe. The first major use of the newly arrived 53 Crusader tanks. Operation was delayed 5 days from the 10th to the 15th of June 1941. As the armoured forces only received their brand new Crusaders on 9th of June. So they were going to get it one day, and then the next day they were going to go into battle. But they said, look, you can have 5 days worth of training.
As we've discussed so many times in the years we've been doing this podcast, not giving the crews long to familiarise themselves with the tank is a sure way to guarantee piss poor performance. Best example, Kursk.
When the A-10 cruisers and Matilda IIs weren't being taken out by initial defensive anti-tank guns and mines, the Crusaders were then being tricked into following up a German retreat and being ambushed by deeper anti-tank guns.
Sword and shield, the Germans called it.
But, there you go.
Yeah.
With the Brits retreating and Operation Battle Axe to relieve the siege of Tobruk lost, the Australian 9th Division would have to hold out Tobruk for another 3 months.
Can I quickly talk about the 9th Division and their tanks? Because I do want to follow up with a comment we got from the last episode. So last episode, Al Palazzo, who's a great friend of the show and a great guest on this show, said no Australian tank has ever fired an enemy tank. And we had a couple of people come in saying, what about the 9th Division's tanks? And Al is technically correct, the best sort of correct, because the Australian 9th Division crewed the tanks, but Australia did not own those tanks. And that comes to the very weird way the Australian 9th was formed of Australians who were living in Britain at the start of the war. And then the British said, we will assign these into the Australian forces instead of having it in the British forces because they're fundamentally all Australians. And when the Australian troops got withdrawn to Australia after the Japanese entered the war, they were all packing up their tanks to send them back to Australia. And the British came in and said, we have to let you people go, but those tanks belong to us, and they're staying. So it's a funny one that the tanks did not belong to Australia. They were not Australian tanks, even though they were crewed by Australians.
Yep,
anyway.
There you go. All right, so the 9th Division will have to hold Tobruk for another 3 months. The 6th Royal Tank Regiment lost 30 Crusaders, some of which the Germans and Italians were able to repair and reuse. And it's really annoying. As the Brits had taken the ground, they were attacking as part of Operation Battle Axe, as part of Operation Brevity 4 weeks earlier on 16th of May, but had then pulled out, thinking, we've taken this ground, we might be attacked, so we'll have to pull out. That's so... Anyway, and for those who haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend the TV show SAS Rogue Heroes. Their first season set where all these battles are taking place, and you get to see why the British had such a hard time winning. And for those who have seen it, watch it again, because Season 2 has just come out, and you need to have a good reminder of what's going on. Have you?
I haven't.
It's on SBS On Demand in Australia. Yeah. It's on other things. It's really good.
SAS Hero Worship. I've got a lot of issues.
No, it's not. It's not that.
Anyway.
All right, show how badly the British command was.
I'll give it a go.
All right, Operation Crusader. It's right there in the name. Anyway, once again, the Brits try and break the siege of Tobruk on 18th of November 41. Of the 700 Allied tanks, there were 210 Crusaders. During the battle, the Allies lost 530 tanks to 100 for the Nazis and Italians. The 7th Armoured Brigade ended the battle with only 4 of its starting 150 tanks, whilst the 6th Tank Regiment, who were the breakthrough force looking to link up with the breakout by the Tobruk garrison, lost half their Crusaders and were down to 28 runners when the advance stopped. 4 days later, on the 27th of November, the New Zealanders broke through and ended the siege of Tobruk. The Australians left by that stage and handed it over to other people. Most of the Australians. There was one battalion left. The battles continued, and as communications broke down and units became isolated, this is where the cunning Hun came up with another of their clever ploys: defeat an enemy with superior numbers by using manoeuvre warfare to defeat them in detail. Now, for those who don't know, that means where your enemy might have, say, 10 tanks, and they've broken them up into 5 groups of 2, and you've only got 4 tanks. So you take your 4 tanks and you drive around and hit each of his 2 tanks at separate times, and you manage to, because you've got 4 and he's only got 2, you kill his 2, and then you move on to his next 2, and you kill those 2, and you move on to his next 2. So while he might have started out with a whole lot more tanks than you've defeated him in detail.
It's what the Germans tried to do in World War I at sea with the Battle of Jutland.
Right. So Rommel moved his fewer tanks around the broken area of operations and was able to isolate dispersed Allied tanks. As he was running out of fuel, Rommel then withdrew 400 miles, leaving the field, not knowing that he'd missed the main Allied supply base by just 4 miles. So with rose-coloured glasses on, the Allies could call it a win. They won. But they lost.
they relieved Tobruk, but they Tobruk got captured later anyway.
Yep.
So
they had relieved Tobruk and chased Rommel from the field, but they had failed to destroy the Axis forces and suffered heavy casualties in personnel and equipment. And 2 months later, Rommel would take his tanks out for a little drive to do a reconnaissance in force and end up forcing the dispersed Allied troops 300 miles back to Gazala.
Oh, I hope things go well at Gazala for them.
Basically, he said...
Sorry, I say that...
knowing that the next battle is...
Gazala did not go well for the Allies.
But the point being is that the Allies were thought, oh, look, nobody's going to be fighting a war right now. So, look, we'll do a lot of reorganisation and move stuff around.
There were also a lot of diversions into Greece and Italy. Well, not Italy, but
Crete,
Greece and Crete and things like that around.
And so they didn't have a lot of frontline troops there, and they thought, look, the Germans won't attack right now. And so when he said, I'll just take the tanks out for a bit of a drive this Sunday afternoon, and suddenly there was nobody in front of him and said, well, we can go about 300 miles. And he did. So, Battle of Gazala. Over the next 4 months, the Allies built up their defensive lines around Gazala and strung out supply depots for 100 miles back to Fort Capuzzo. The defence was set up in brigade strongboxes surrounded by minefields. This allowed them to cover a large area, but they were unable to provide mutual support to the brigade boxes. They also received the first of 160 M3 Grant tanks and deployed them with the 7th Armoured Division.
And this is where all the British flag shaggers who go on about, oh, the Crusader was actually pretty good, and it's like, yeah, the M3 Grant/Lee was a appallingly bad tank design, but it was still so much better than what the British had been building.
It wasn't quite as fast. It couldn't go quite as far, but yes, everything else was better about it.
It had a good engine. It was reliable. It had a big gun. It had thick armor. These are the things you seek out in a tank.
All right. Of the 700 Allied tanks, 240 were Crusaders. However, the dispersal of forces allowed Rommel once again to concentrate his forces when he started his attack in May 42 and defeat the Allies in detail. Again, the fighting was fierce and Rommel got pretty lucky a number of times, or the Allies blundered a number of times. So it was touch and go a lot of the times, but he's the one. He was lucky general, as Napoleon would approve of.
Yeah, but there's the old saying as well that opportunities multiply as they are seized, and Rommel was very good at seizing opportunities. Yeah, he was terrible at logistics, but he was very good at seizing opportunities.
Default to action. Yeah. Both armies lost most of their tanks. The Allies had 1,188 tank casualties, and then you say, well, but they only started with 700. They had added more tanks in as the battle went, or tanks got damaged, repaired, put back into line. And it was a 17-day battle. And the Axis, after which they lost 1,188, and the Axis were down to 70 operational tanks.
Sorry, it was the Allies
They'd lost, or had 1,188 tank casualties in 17 days. The Axis, from their 530 tanks, were down to 70 operational tanks. However, the Axis armies...
Rommel fought most of that war with handfuls of tanks. He just used them very effectively.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. He had his 4 tanks versus the... Yeah. Anyway, however, the Axis armies held the field at the end of the battle and were able to recover or repair their damaged vehicles. Tobruk then fell to the Axis again. Maybe first. No, actually, it was held by the Italians to begin with. So, yes, it was again. This defeat set off what was called the Gazala Gallop. I'm sure an Australian came up with that name because it's a nice little...
Yeah, I mean, you get to the Bladesville races in the War of 1812. These things, armies quickly identify when they're running.
As the 8th Army retreated 300 miles back to Egypt, allowing Rommel to pick up all the supplies they'd left along the way. Which brings us to the first battle of El Alamein. The beginning of the end... No, so the beginning of the end of the beginning?
Or the end of the beginning. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that. But anyway, so let's get on to a quote from Churchill later on. By 1 July, so a couple of weeks later after Gazala, the 8th Army was back at El Alamein. I'm just going to call it Alamein from now on, with 137 serviceable tanks, with 42 en route from workshops and 902 tanks waiting to be repaired.
I wonder how many of those were Crusaders. I would suspect quite a lot of those 902 were Crusaders. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, the Crusader was popular with its crews. And if I was a tank crew and my tank was never ready to go out and fight and I was just sitting in the mess drinking beers, I'd be quite a fan of that tank too.
I think the Tube We might.
We've come to the end of the tube. All right.
I'm going to drain the tube.
Mm-hmm. No, there's still a bit left in there, right? Oh, no, it's gone.
We're going to... Anyway.
It's gone. Look, Hans. Look, Germans.
Drip.
Watch, behold. This is how Australians drink beer.
Yeah. However, with the... So Rommel only had 70 tanks on the first day of the battle. However, with shorter supply lines and Rommel down to the bare bones of tanks, men and supplies, he was attacking with the 90th Light Division, the Jaeger Division, that was down to 1,700 men, when it should be around 10,000, possibly more. I mean,
all bats get very, chewed up in war. But
the point being is that a normal German division should be about 17,000. A light division is probably lower. It might be 15 to 10. I couldn't find precise numbers, so I said, look, it should be around 10,000. He was attacking with the division with 1,700.
Yeah.
That's not many.
That's a reinforced battalion. But,
and he could not maneuver his panzer regiments away from their assigned orders. So he said, look, your job is to do this, and that's all I can get you to do, because they didn't have enough fuel. If he could not recall a force to exploit a gap once they were committed, because there was not enough benzene to be able to deploy them.
What's benzene?
That's fuel. That's what the Germans call fuel.
That's interesting. I mean, benzene as a chemical isn't. Anyway.
Well, if you watch SAS Rogue Heroes,
they
blow up a lot of tankers with the words benzene written across the side of it.
Okay.
Anyway, the 4 days of digging in allowed the Allies enough time to get organised to defend North Africa. Maybe the fact that Rommel was using Crusaders was what caused this offensive to fail. Even once to assist the 90th Light Division, he took his headquarters in force, including himself, into the battle with their captured Allied tanks to keep the advance going. Or maybe it was the Commonwealth failure to set up any new lines of defence after Gazala from Fort Capuzzo and Mirza Matrua that saved them, as all the Allied supply dumps Rommel captured had been set up as part of the consolidation efforts from December 41 to February 42, when the 8th Army was reorganising. So by running away so far and so fast, they hadn't set up any more supply dumps so far back along their supply route that when there was nothing more for Rommel to capture after Mirza Matrua, which was 100 miles away from El Alamein. So that's a long way of saying that because they ran away so fast, there was nothing more for him to capture, and that's why he was down to the bare bones, and he was really sucking on fumes.
So it's kind of a sucky version of Scorched Earth.
and that he had nothing to attack them with, and yet he still attacked because he thought, look, I'm 100 miles away from Alexandria. If I can take that and Cairo, they're done. The Suez Canal is in my hands, and North Africa is German, and we'll link up with the troops coming down through the Caucasus and the supply lines for the British.
Rommel's great hope as he sat at El Alamein wondering what was going to happen was, I hope the Battle of Stalingrad goes well.
All right, but the few M3 Grants, Valentines, Matilda IIs, Stuarts, and yes, Crusaders that were available to the Allies, along with the determination of the infantry, artillery, and the Desert Air Force, were able to hold the fascists back and save North Africa.
Now, I just want to note there the Valentines, which was a Vickers design, but a much more distributed production. It was built in workshops all over the United Kingdom, and bicycle shops were making sub-assemblies. But they put a Detroit diesel engine into it. The Valentine
could do 20 miles an hour, so it's slightly slower, but it's so much better.
Some of them did, 1,500 miles without a service. Which for tanks is
I mean, if I was given the choice between the Crusader and the Valentine, and say, well, this one goes at 27 miles an hour, this one goes at 20 miles an hour, I'll go with the Valentine. Thanks. Is what I'd be saying. Anyway. Getting back to the Australian 9th Division, they even managed to capture the German signal force FAK 621, which had been listening in onto Allied radio chatter and providing Rommel with immediate battlefield intelligence. This is then significantly hampering him and hampering the Nazis, because they figured out not only was he listening in onto local radio chatter, they also found out that the American consulate in Cairo's codes had been broken, and so what they were sending back to Washington had been broken by the Germans, and so they could know everything that was going on from the Americans in Cairo, what the British were doing, and so he had all their intelligence. And by the Australians capturing them, basically shut all that off.
Good work, the Ninth Division.
They are pretty much the stars of bloody of North Africa. People talk about the 7th Armoured Regiment, the Desert Rats and so forth, but yeah, guys, just try doing the hard work.
The Australian Ninth is the stuff of legends. But before we go any further, I think we're going to go to the halftime break now. We'll come back and do more Crusader in the second half. So what we're going to put on now is a bunch of archival footage, and you've seen some of it in the background behind us, but you're going to get the sound now. And think about this. Look at modern YouTubers talking about tanks and reading off the press releases, and this is inside the Chieftain's Hatch style stuff, and it was in 1941. Also, we have the Tank Patrol movie. Which I have cut out all the stuff when they're sitting in a cave talking about their girlfriends, and just kept it to the Crusader being the most amazing tank that ever was.
Made in 1941.
Made in 1941, where somehow Lord Nuffield managed to get a 1941 movie crew into North Africa with people playing Italians. And anyway, I want you to apply your critical thinking lens to these propaganda videos. And remember, they tried to sell Crusader to Australia, and that's why this stuff ended up in the Australian War Memorial. So, have a watch, enjoy, and we will be back to tackle the second Battle of El Alamein and everything else we've got for the second half.
The foundations on which our empire rests are the workshops of democracy. In them are forged the links in the chain of industry which binds together our widespread empire. The hiss of molten metal, the shattering echo of the steel mills, the roar of the machine shops, all these are the marching songs of industry producing equipment for the development and protection of our empire. Under the stress of war, scientific research is turned to the creation of new ideas and inventions. Brilliant in conception, many of these embody the efforts of the finest British technicians and instill a feeling of pride and confidence in those who use them. Among the weapons designed for war on land, the British tank is predominant, and of these, the Crusader is outstanding. One of the latest products of engineering skill, it is a formidable addition to the equipment of the British forces. Armed with one high-velocity 2-pounder gun and 2 machine guns, it is driven by an exterior track carried on no fewer than 10 independently sprung bogie wheels. This gives even weight distribution, and more important, steady riding over rough ground, thereby promoting accurate gun laying. A wireless installation enables the commander to transmit or receive messages at full speed. The height of the Crusader has been kept down so that it will present as small a target as possible. This reduction in height also gives a low center of gravity, with a consequent increase in stability. The hull of the Crusader is divided into 5 separate compartments. On the right, in front, is the driver's compartment, while next to it is the auxiliary gun turret. Across the center is the fighting compartment, which carries on its top the main turret. Immediately behind this is located the engine, while across the rear end is situated the transmission compartment, housing the steering mechanism and main drives to the track. Now let's go inside. In front, on the right, is the driver's compartment, and it is important that you should be conversant with the layout and familiarize yourselves with the controls and instruments. The pedal layout is quite normal, with the clutch on the left, the brake in the center, the accelerator on the right, and the gear change lever between the driver's legs. On each side, in a natural and comfortable position, are the operating levers of the steering valves. The parking brake ratchet is controlled by a knob on the switch panel. The slow-running control is to be found by the driver's right foot. As indicated by the arrow, at the right-hand side of the driver's seat are the ignition and choke controls. As for instruments, an indirectly illuminated panel is mounted on the left side of the driver's hood. It comprises an air pressure gauge, engine revolution counter, and oil pressure gauge. The combined speed and mileage recorder for the use of the tank commander is mounted on the rear bulkhead of the fighting compartment. The switchboard is situated immediately in front of the driver, and on it are mounted on the left side the exterior light switches and the starter button, while on the right side is the compass illuminant switch and the two ignition switches. An extra socket for an external inspection lamp is fitted beside the rear lamp under the louvers at the back of the vehicle. The driver is given a clear vision forward by means of a prismatic visor. Prisms that are damaged can be replaced quickly, and in the event of an emergency, the visor can be closed by means of a small lever which raises a bulletproof shield over the outer aperture. Vision is then obtained through fine slots in the front plate. Observation from the side is obtained through a slot which is covered by a shutter, operated by an accessible handle. So much for the driver's compartment. On the left-hand side of the front compartment is the auxiliary turret. This is mounted on a ball race, and the gunner's seat is suspended from it. By means of a spur gear type of hand traverse, the turret and seat can be rotated through a total angle of 150 degrees. To prevent interference between the 2-pounder gun and the auxiliary machine gun, the latter is automatically depressed by a cam in the main turret. Make quite sure that the travelling lock on the gun mounting is released, that is, in the up position, before the main turret is rotated. Otherwise, the depression control will be damaged. In the rear of the auxiliary turret is the fuse box for the driving lights, horn, inspection lamp sockets, etc. In the center of the tank is the fighting compartment, which carries on its top plate the rotating turret. This is very heavily armored and is designed to reduce the chances of a direct hit. Inside the turret are mounted the 2-pounder and the 7.9 Beezer guns. They and their telescopic sight are carried in a coaxial mounting, at the side of which is a smoke bomb thrower. There are two periscopes, one for the commander, which is mounted centrally and is capable of rotating in any direction, and one for the loader, situated on the right side of the 2-pounder. On either side of the turret is a large visor with a controllable bulletproof shutter. Access to the turret is by a large door in the roof controlled by parallel motion levers. The complete turret assembly is carried on a caged ball race and is operated by hydraulic traversing gear. It is controlled by the gunner, and the speed of rotation can be varied, thus permitting both rapid and accurate gun laying. Also in the fighting compartment is the electrical control board, which is a complete unit housing the dynamo fuse, terminals for cable connections, and an ammeter. A strip-type fuse, for which spares are carried inside the terminal cover, will blow in the event of a dead short across the battery. Fuses are replaced easily by pulling and turning the Bakelite knobs at the top of the fuse posts. There is also a master switch which disconnects the battery from the remainder of the electrical equipment, thus providing a quick means of combating a short circuit. One of the most important features is the compressed air system, without which the vehicle cannot be moved. The air is drawn through a large capacity filter where it is cleaned, then through an anti-freezer unit. It is now compressed in the main component of the system and is then passed through an oil and water trap. The dry air is finally stored at about 220 to 230 pounds pressure in a storage bottle in the front of the fighting section. Across the rear of the vehicle is the transmission compartment. This contains a 4-speed gearbox and steering units, the output shafts of the latter connecting to the final reduction gear and track driving sprockets. A powerful external contracting brake is situated on each side of the hull, and operates on a brake drum mounted on the final drive pinion shaft. Immediately behind the main turret is the engine compartment. The power unit has 12 cylinders in 2 inclined banks of 6. It is water-cooled, develops 340 horsepower at 1,550 revolutions per minute, and imparts a governed speed of 27.5 miles per hour to the tank. It has a high power-to-weight ratio, which is responsible for the extremely good acceleration and general performance of the Crusader. Remember that however good the design of a vehicle, such as the Crusader tank undoubtedly is, it is still dependent on human attention for the maintenance of its mechanical efficiency. For this reason, the crew should make themselves fully conversant with the maintenance duties and carry them out with conscientiousness and regularity, thereby ensuring that the fighting vehicle under their control is utilized to its greatest advantage. Remember, lubrication and mechanical adjustment are the stepping stones to mechanical efficiency.
Everybody set?
Yeah. That's them, all right.
Time to move off. Well, you'll have to do your stuff this time, Tiger, my girl.
What do we do with that bloke? Don't think we can carry him. Full up on top here.
We'd better turn him loose.
Yeah, let him go.
Well, you see how it is, boy. We'd love to take you with us, but the conductor says the bus is full.
Never mind, there'll be plenty more along in a minute. We're off. Come on, let's go.
Driver advance. Glazy! Steady. On. And give them this one with the best wishes from good old London town.
Trinidad.
Let him have one from Joburg, Bluey. And Coventry. And Birmingham. And Plymouth. Give him one for my missus and kids.
We can. The whole British flaming Commonwealth of Nations. Do you think you could stop us? Held the boys behind us. You barmy.
Welcome back, folks.
Hello. To all our lovely viewers out there, we can't believe how many of you are. There's a lively discussion going on in the comments, but we hope you've enjoyed the discussions, the video about the Crusader tank and the Bakelite knobs. I like the Bakelite knobs, so I don't know about you, John, but it was quite a highlight for me to hear about the fuses and the Bakelite knobs. People don't know what Bakelite is these days. It's one of those things. Just look it up.
It was a good material for it today. It was okay, but silicon rubber is a far superior material, and that's why we use that now.
But come on, Bluey, you just got to get those eye ties. What for, and whatever else they were doing. Anyway, Second Battle of El Alamein. 3 months later, the Allies have changed leadership. Monty's in charge now, and had time to build up the forces and ready to go on the offensive. Starting with the Second Battle of El Alamein, the new Crusader Mark III with the 6-pounder gun has replaced most of the Mark 1s and 2s, along with the arrival of 254 M4 Shermans and more M3 Grants. And they had also improved the reliability of the Crusaders, as Nuffeld had sent engineers over to Egypt to experience and make a video, obviously, because that's what they were doing, is the part of tank patrol. 1941. That's actual footage of not of battalions, obviously, but of in the theatre of the war that they're actually doing. Anyway, so they sent their engineers over to Egypt to experience the conditions and talk to the troops and the maintainers to see what could be done to make the tanks better. While they were still nowhere near the reliability of the Valentine, let alone the US M3 Grants or Shermans, but they were still the biggest number of Allied tanks at 294 of the 1,000 tanks available on day one of the battle. Many Crusaders were equipped with anti-mine roller attachments, AMRAs, kit to deal with the huge German minefields that have been set up over the last 4 months. During the first hours of the offensive, they were also covered with sunshades. And
when they say sunshade, that's often just a giant truck body built over the top.
Yep.
But,
to form part of the deception plan of the Allied tanks, where they were or were not concentrating. So basically, they would move They would create tanks out of these sunshades that were covering over trucks, and they would also create sunshades over
trucks to look like tanks.
All that for
and the inflatable tanks and
they didn't have inflatable tanks in North Africa.
Yeah, they didn't in North Africa, but it was just an interesting thing that you wanted your tanks to not look like tanks, and you wanted your not tanks to look like tanks, and thus the enemy was confused.
Yes, just like us.
Yeah.
Once again, the Allies had overwhelming numbers in troops, tanks, and planes, and a much shorter secure supply line, whilst the Axis forces had supply lines hundreds of miles long, and which was constantly being interrupted by Allied bombing.
If we're talking about the Northern Desert Campaign, it's really worth reiterating that while the Russians will make jokes about
So 7 divisions,
how many army groups were involved in this skirmish. The logistics that were consumed by the Germans in North Africa was actually,
and the Allies.
but it was logistics the Germans were consuming in North Africa that should have been in Russia, were getting up to army group levels. So it wasn't the useless skirmish that the Russians to mock us for.
I know. The main thing is that Viscount Allenbrook had been in Churchill's ears saying, "Look, if we lose the Suez Canal, everything takes twice as long, which means it costs twice as much to get through."
No, hang on. You got to go back on that, because you can go through the Suez Canal, but the Mediterranean was impassable until 1943.
That's why they had to get the Mediterranean. That's why they said to the Americans that, don't worry about the Japanese, don't worry about bloody France. Come and take North Africa with us, which is why Operation Torch happened, and they landed in
but the Suez Canal was fundamentally impassable, not because the canal was impassable, but because until the Italians were forced out of the war in 43, they were all going round.
Allenbrook was looking at 43 and beyond, rather than 41 and 42, which is.
Yeah, fair enough.
Why fight the war that you're actually fighting when the war that's needs to be won is next year?
Yeah,
and he knew what he was doing.
Sure.
Logistics. He knew about logistics. All right. The quality of the Allies' equipment was also greatly improved, so long as the new tanks. So along with the new tanks, they got a large shipment of new 6-pounder anti-tank guns. And the Allies finally...
Which they let the Italians use when they made movies about them. So that was
2
very
years
generous.
earlier. The Allies had finally learned to concentrate their armoured forces and not chase after German forces, who seemed to be running away for no apparent reason, which happened to then lead into an area full of anti-tank guns.
Very well concealed anti-tank guns.
Yep.
Yeah.
So starting the second battle of El Alamein started with a huge artillery bombardment. They said that it was the biggest one since World War One. So who knows? I don't. But that was the claim. It was 5.5 hours of 882 guns, and the battle went on for 12 days, with Monty adapting his plans to try and force a gap in the Axis lines, which finally came when he ordered the Australian 9th Division again to drive north to the coast road and form from their position and hold the way open.
Which it's worth us giving a tip of the hat to the New Zealanders. The 9th Division plugging away through the middle drew in all the Axis
I'm ignoring
forces, and it was the Kiwis who actually made the breakthroughs.
The Kiwis have done a lot of work during these battles, but I'm just going to ignore them because I'm Australian, and they've got the Bledisloe Cup for the last 24 years, so bugger them.
We've won the Bledisloe Cup like a handful of times in 120 years, but
Anyway,
and no signs of winning it ever again.
All right, Chris Bell, welcome. Thanks for joining in from Iowa. At the start of the battle on the 23rd of October, the Australian 9th Division Cavalry Regiment had included 15 Crusader tanks, 5 Honeys, which were the Stuarts, 52 Bren gun carriers, or as we would say, universal carriers.
Hey, I just want to quickly go back to, remember, the main armament of the Crusader tank is the 2-pounder gun.
No, these are the Mark IIIs. So
Okay, sure, but let me just step back to the Mark 1s and 2s. The universal carrier can also mount this exact same weapon in a much lighter footprint. In terms of getting the weapon to where it's needed, it just goes, putting 2-pounders in tanks when carriers could carry them was just silly. But anyway, yeah. All
right, so just to give a little bit of history with the 9th Division again, the Australian 9th Division, whilst the infantry had been holding Tobruk in 1942, their cavalry regiment had been detached from the rest of the division and was off taking Damascus in their Vickers 6-ton tanks, which is why we keep going back to, it's not a real war until the Australians take Damascus. Which, were there any Australian fighters taking Damascus the other week? We don't know. Maybe. But
a lot of Tajikis who were being paid for by the CIA. But anyway, let's keep moving.
They were given Crusaders when they rejoined the rest of the 9th Division. However, when the 9th Division was recalled to Australia in January 1943, they had to leave their Crusaders behind in North Africa.
Not so much had to leave as we're told you don't own those.
They had to leave them. Right? If somebody hadn't noticed, I'm sure the Australians would have managed to steal them.
And for the purpose of completeness, the 9th Division then spent months and months retraining as jungle fighters, and they were very effective jungle fighters because they were a fantastic unit. But I would still say it was a waste of the best mechanised infantry of World War II to pull them back to Australia to do some mopping up operations in the South Pacific. Anyway.
All right, the Allies were finally able to achieve a decisive victory against Rommel when he arrived, as this was the second time he'd missed the start of a battle. The first time was when this time he was sick. The first time was Operation Crusader, when the Allied deception plan was so good, he'd gone on holidays. And so he had to turn up the next day. He was like, oh, there's something happening. And
Germans really believe in their holidays. There's a lot of things to admire about Germans and their
they work when they work.
Holidays.
They work when they work. When they're on holidays, they're on holidays. I mean, it's simple. With the Axis forces broken, the Crusader was finally able to do what it was built for, which was exploiting a gap in their lines, racing into the enemy rear. The speed and fuel tanks of the Crusader meant it was able to outrun and outdistance both Allied and Axis forces. This victory of the Second Battle of El Alamein led Churchill to give his speech that, now, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And later he would say, before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat.
Now,
that's my bad impression of
it was a pretty good impression. I like that. But
thank you.
HMS Warspite at the Second Battle of Narvik would have some things to say to Winston about that. But Yeah, they scrapped
Yeah.
Warspite, and Winston went on to become Prime Minister again.
Yep.
There you go.
All right. Advanced to Tunisia, then the Operation Husky to Sicily. Crusaders, almost only Mark IIIs, were still seen in action in Tunisia by 43, in Sicily and Italy with the Canadian troops. So by this stage, they were no longer seen as a useful gun tank, and which would be its role had been taken over by the Shermans, because why not?
I just want to quickly say, our new friend Chris Bell has asked the questions, would have a Bofors 40mm been a better gun on the Crusader? Yes! Yes, Chris, you are correct. We talked about that earlier, that not only would the Bofors 40mm have given an effective high explosive round, but it is being used today on CV90s in Ukraine and still is a very effective weapon. It would have been a great weapon and much better than the 2-pounder. Because apparently you couldn't put a high explosive round in the 2-pounder. So there we go. And I would also say there is in our slideshow Crusaders that were fitted out for anti-aircraft work with the Bofors 40mm. So it actually happened, but they just kept using the crappy version.
They were. All right, the Crusaders were deployed on the Dover coast as part of the deception plan to convince the Germans that the Allies were invading Calais. So they were all part of Operation Mincemeat. By mid-44, many were converted in the factory to non-gun variants or remained in home defence units and were used for tactical drilling until 1945. The Mark III remains the biggest production of the entire Cruiser 6 series. The gun tractors would be used extensively to tow the British 17-pounder throughout Europe after D-Day. The anti-aircraft versions were also deployed in Normandy, but with the completeness of Allied air superiority, there was limited need for anti-aircraft vehicles to move for the Allied advance, and after the Normandy landings, the anti-aircraft forces were broken up and were kept to the rear to protect bases and other installations. However, the Polish Armoured Division did use their anti-aircraft Crusaders on some ground targets. Operators. Commonwealth forces. So, Brits, Australians, South Africans, and Canada.
Australians with a big asterisk because we didn't own the tanks.
Well, we still operate.
There is one at Puckapunyal which they sent to us, and we said, "This is really bad. We don't want this."
We will go. One day we will go to Puckapunyal. One day we'll go to Parramatta. But this year we are definitely going to Cairns. Anyway, we'll get on to that. But interesting, the poor old Kiwis did not get any Crusaders. Right?
Poor old Kiwis, they dodged a bullet there, didn't they?
They done so much work in North Africa, and yet they weren't given. They were just seen as really good infantry. They were also provided the Free French, and after the war, the Free French then took a turret of a Crusader tank and was used by the French Far East Expeditionary Corps to defend the city of Hanoi at Huang Yen, north of Haiphong, at the beginning of the First Indochina War. How's that? There's a nice photo of that sitting up there going, yep, what's this Crusader turret doing here? Well, anyway, who knows? But they took what they got. The Polish forces, as we said before, the Polish Armoured Division were using theirs. The captured by the Germans and the Italians. Don't forget the Italians, they were there. They were fascists too. And they're fascists again these days, but anyway. They were using them in North Africa. They had limited usage as they didn't have any spares for them. So while Rommel was employing them as Butte Panzers as their captured tanks, they didn't have enough spares for them to be able to keep on going. All right, John needs a...
John needs a beer.
John needs a beer.
Oh, it's another VB. Okay.
We can go to...
We wanted some audio of the... There we go. I hope you enjoyed that.
All right. Argentina bought 130 of the chassis after the war and converted them into self-propelled guns and rocket artillery and used them through the 1950s, but then scrapped them all. So it's really a bit of a shame that they didn't keep a few of them. No, too far. Didn't keep a few of them because they were very unique for Crusader of what they look like with their 75 and 105mm French guns mounted on a boxy.
I just don't understand why you'd use this as a general purpose chassis, given it's just got such a bad engine. But I guess when that's all you can buy, that's what you go with. Yeah.
All right. Egypt was given / they were left behind and used them through to the 1960s, especially the anti-aircraft versions, which were then used in the Suez Crisis and the Six-Day War.
Which did not go well for Egypt, but yeah.
I mean, the Suez Crisis went well for them.
Well, militarily it went badly, but when Eisenhower threatened to nuke London, things turned around.
What was it? When the French and the British and the Israelis are fighting, are teamed up against the Egyptians and Americans. Yeah, that was kind of a weird statement. Anyway, models. Models. All right. Crusader Mark 1 only had 40 mils of front armour and the original bow gunner turret with the Nuffield Liberty engine. The Mark II increased the armour thickness to 49 millimetres. That's pretty much, and most of the time they took off the front turret. The Mark III increased the armour to 51 millimetres. This is where the big changes came in. New mantlet for the gun, based on the gunner's side. Redesigned the top hatch to provide the more room for the gunner and the commander to get out. An extractor fan to remove fumes from the turret.
Oh, jeez, why would you do that? Remember, they were still up into the CVRTs making turrets that were killing their crews, but yeah.
All right. Introduced armoured ammunition storage boxes, and most importantly, installed the 6-pounder gun, plus the Mark IV Liberty engine, fixing many of the reliability problems previously encountered.
And putting my tinfoil hat on, Nuffield, having seen which way the wind was blowing and that the Germans weren't actually going to win the war, was suddenly interested in making his products as good as they could be. Anyway, that's just my slander against the great man.
All right. This featured the Mark III engines, later updated water pumps, along with the shaft drive, replacing the chain drive for the cooling fans, and production started of the Mark IIIs in May 1942 and was finished by 1943.
It was still a terrible tank for 1942. I mean, there's a reason why the Soviets, they were like, give us more Valentines. Don't want that.
Yeah, and stop changing the configuration of the Valentines. We liked it where it was. Don't muck around with it anymore. All right, variants. All right, an important piece of kit for the Crusader was the rotor trailer, for carrying spare ammo in the trailer and spare fuel in the metal wheels of the trailer that they would tow behind the tank.
They did try to use the rotor trailer with Centurion, which Centurion is a very good tank, but yeah.
With only 100k range,
not
even 100 miles.
Which is why they needed the rotor trailer.
Right. However, this trailer would flip when hitting a bump in the road, and the wheels would split and leak out fuel all over the rough place on rough roads. And everyone loves the idea of ammo being bounced around, flipped over, and then covered in fuel, because that's the ammo you want to load into your tank, or actually pull out of a trailer being dragged along behind your tank because it's flipped over, and you hadn't realised because you've got such bad visibility that you didn't know that your trailer that is dragging behind you is flipped over. And
let's reiterate that the supposedly cruel and uncaring Soviets and Japanese who would send their troops to die expendably in waves had all said, we are not putting our people in a petrol-engined fighting vehicle. And the British and Americans are like, hey, the petrol's the only way to get the power we want. Which also, remember that the Russians at least had a engine that was delivering more horsepower than on diesel than the petrol engines. Yeah. Anyway, just something to think about.
So anyway, there's a great video with the chief and even David Fletcher about talking about the rotor trailer. So just this is why
he's not a fan.
No. All right. Each of the models also had a close support version with the 3-inch howitzer instead of the main gun. So that's the Mark 1, 2, 3s, as well as a command version with a dummy gun and more radios, which closely resembled the artillery observation post version, again with dummy guns and more radios, which meant they could call in fire missions whilst the tanks were moving forward on the attack. The first version of the anti-aircraft variant was the 6-pounder was replaced with the Bofors 40mm gun. What a surprise! With an autoloader and powered mounting in an open-top turret. Then they evolved into platforms with twin
Ehrlichen
20mm guns for anti-aircraft use and a single 303 Vickers machine gun for spotting. The turret was a small polygonal turret with heavy armour but poor situational visibility for spotting approaching aircraft.
It's a bit of a problem.
It's a bit of a problem. I mean, until you get radar. They tried a version with triple
Ehrlichens, but yeah.
But it was only used for training. Then they went to the gun tractor versions, which were fast and popular with artillery crews because these were what were dragging around the 17-pounders, using them after D-Day until the end of the war, as they were much more capable than the Morris C8 gun trucks that they had been using. But they could be hard on the towed 17-pounders, as they were able to go places where towed artillery probably shouldn't be dragged to. And so, it was a little bit of a problem, but the crews liked them. They were very fast. They said that they could take the governors out and run away from military police who were trying to chase them down on motorbikes. So that was one of the fun things. An armoured recovery vehicle was based on the turretless Crusader hull. Only one prototype was built, and I think they stuck with the Valentine for that. So, Crusaders with anti-mine roller attachments, devices consisting of 4 heavy rollers suspended from a frame. Frame were set up for the Second Battle of El Alamein, whereby they would just try and the weight of the rollers could be increased by filling with sand or water. Then they tried out using them for experimentation, such as a flotation kit, 2 pontoons attached to the hull sides, special blades attached to the tracks to propel the vehicle in water, and a cowl over engine air tanks and cooling the louvers. None of those worked, so they didn't bother with those. A post-war modification was built for testing purposes only, fitting it with a 140mm gun at the front of the vehicle facing back, similar in concept to the Valentine.
That's a big gun.
Similar in concept to the Valentine Archer with a 17-pounder, which had the 17-pounder facing backwards.
Valentine Archer was a good vehicle, but yeah.
It's still weird in World of Tanks to see a tank start off the battle, turn around backwards, and then race off because the gun. Yeah, it was weird. Anyway, so some Crusader gun tractors sold after the war to Argentina were converted to self-propelled guns with French 75mm or 105mm guns installed in a large boxy structure. Now we get to legacy.
The legacy. Tell us about that, Rob.
What would the British have done if they couldn't get M3 Grants when they did? Would they have lost North Africa without reliable tanks, or would Rommel have run out of fuel? Was the greatest contribution of the Crusader as deception/dummy tanks in the southern flank of El Alamein and the Dover coast of England in 1944? These are questions. Look, it's... What other tanks would they have had? Look, more Matilda 2s and Valentines? I mean, they wouldn't have had cruiser tanks, but did they actually achieve anything cruiser type-ish until the Second Battle of El Alamein, which point they had Lees and Grants and Shermans? Did they really need them? Would they have just been better off with other things?
I just think this was a bad tank.
Yeah, exactly, which is what I'm saying, is that the legacy of it is... If they produce 5,300 other tanks, they might not have lost so hard. But
5,300 Valentines with a 6-pounder would have made a difference
in 1941.
Yeah,
but not at the end of 1942.
Yeah.
Right. So other things. It does get a good mission in Call of Duty 2, where you get to drive around North Africa in a Crusader taking on the Nazis. And it does make an appearance in Girls und Panzer with the St. Gloriana Girls College fielding 4 Crusaders Mark IIIs commanded by Rose Hip.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Well, you got to. The legacy is there.
Yeah.
You got to know where it is in the modern world.
Yep. Now we still have 53% of you saying that this tank is better than people say, and I don't know what to say to you morons. But you know. Obviously, you're entitled to your opinions. I'm assuming you voted for Trump. I don't know. Well, actually, no, because I can get why Trump voters voted. Anyway, let's move on.
I think John is feeling the effect of beer, and we're going to keep on going. We've done our halftime episode. Anyway.
Yep. Now, I just want to note for people listening on the podcast feed. On YouTube, we'll have that video up, but it's not going to work for you in audio-only format, so we're going to just leave that out for you. But, yes. Okay, now it is time to do the most important thing we do.
Thank our lovely patrons.
Oh, no, it's not doing it. Come on. There we go. All right, so in our Artificer tier, which is where you get our halftime break video early... and everything's ad-free. We have Brian Jenkins, Chris Pezet, Cornelius Weber, Jonathan Markle, Johnny Oot, Maxi Mixed, and Pear. And then in the Apprentice tier, where you get everything ad-free, we have Anton Gorbanov, Carter Heller, Christoph Keller, Dan Sepienza, David Mulvaney, Elliot Spicer, Floaty Burb, Guy Hook, Hans Wang, Henry Hemmed, Jay Beckman Strauss, Jamie Stokes, Late Apex, Russell Phillips, Scotch 12, Steve Matthews, and Tony L. So thank you, all of you, for being such amazing supporters of this show. And now we're into the formal second half. So just want to reiterate, for people thinking of supporting us on Patreon, which is enormously helpful and is why we have better microphones now, you need to make sure that when you're signing up, do it on the website and not through Apple, because Apple will take 30%. And we'll be talking more about the bastardry of tech billionaires as we proceed into this.
Look, Brandon makes a good point.
Show. Mm-hmm.
The Girls and Panzer is an important part of tank culture. Thank you very much. See?
It is.
See?
It's
People understand.
it's an essential part of tank culture.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
All right. Now, beer review, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I've got a ways to go on this one, but you can pour that and start drinking it.
I will pour this one.
Form opinions, Rob. But
no, it's not warm beer. It is not warm beer. We
Okay.
in Australia, we do not do warm beer. No, it does not matter.
But in Australia, our warm is so much warmer than a British pub cellar that, you got to understand why we do things the way we do.
I mean, it is, while it's a very windy 27 degrees today, it is a very nice, out of the wind, it's a lovely day. All right.
Now, just we're going to keep encouraging folks. Oz Armour Fest 2025. We're going to be there.
You bet.
We're committed. So if you want to come hang out with us, we're going to ride tanks by day and drink beer and talk shit by night. And it's fun. We know going to Cairns for us is an expensive thing. For the rest of you, it's expensive. But it's going to be good if you can make it. So it's 29th to 31 August this year, 2025. So anyone who wants to come join us,
Cairns is a lovely place.
It's going to be good, and you can see the Great Barrier Reef, and
it's really good to see you in the Great Barrier Reef.
And there's like 5 breweries, and it's going to be good.
And look, we'll buy if people coming out to the pub with us, we'll buy you a beer, especially if you're wearing a t-shirt.
No, we will buy you a beer if you wear a Totally Tank t-shirt.
Well, we might. I'm thinking about an idea of maybe putting some money over the bar. Putting some money over the bar for anybody wearing a Totally Tank t-shirt.
Yeah, that's sort of
see how we go.
But, yeah,
because hey, why not? I mean, yeah. Anyway, beer.
Beer.
You're still
I'm still on the VB, so
right.
you're going to fill time.
I will talk about it is the Namislav. No, I'm not even going. It's a Pils. It's a Polish Pils. Belongs to the open-minded. It belongs to the open-minded. It's the produced in Poland only. All right. Original recipe. I like the idea of belongs to the open-minded because I feel that we are open-minded people, John. And
you got to be careful with open-minded because there's a lot of freaking perverts out there who associate,
but when we're
doing horrible things with we're just being open-minded.
But we're talking about tanks and beer, and so for tanks and beer, we are.
So we like open minds, open minds, open eyes, open hearts, 2 hands on your wallet.
Yes,
which is the advice on traveling in China. I used to get.
How would you say that?
Namislav.
Anyway, it's a Polish beer. It's a
Polish pronunciation's wild. The letters don't mean what you think they do. But,
well, there you go. And speaking Australian, because it's the second best podcast in the Australian language, and that's
probably
what we speak here.
Not
probably.
But...
All right.
Hang on, Mashed Patats joined us. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Well done.
Yes.
All right. 5.8% by volume, 500 mils, US 1 pint.
It looks like a pint. It's a tall boy.
Yeah, it's a tall boy.
Yes. Keep talking, Rob. We can't afford dead air.
I'm reading stuff. In Namislav, we believe that quality comes from the substance. Our beer is brewed in harmony. The art of craftsmanship only from natural ingredients. All comes from the region as its own pace, as it takes time for beer to mature. Namislav for connoisseurs. Poland. Because the Brits gave the Poles Crusaders. and well, they make nice beers.
It's the worst thing to do. The Poles do make nice beers. Polish beer is amazing. We have a Polish club here in Canberra, not that far away from here,
which we drink at quite often. Yeah,
and it's great. And so we drink a lot of strong Polish beers, and they sell them for like $10 for a tall boy, which is amazing for bar prices. Anyway, this has it feels to me like it's English hopping. It's quite.
It's supposed to be pills, but
but the hops it's got that earthy spiciness you normally associate with English. Well, I normally associate it with English hops. Anyway, it's a nice lager, but it's a very earthy hop bill compared to say your German.
Now, is that a 1321 or is it 1921?
It looks like a 1321.
It does look like a 1321. So they got some history behind them. Right, so wow.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. So in terms of beer review, the what's it called? Jesus.
Yeah.
The Namis Rao. There you go. It's not what you're expecting in a light, fluffy beer that it looks like, but you might well enjoy the spicy, earthy British-style hop bills. So it's something that I'd make for myself, frankly. But
probably only want one of those, though. It's not a you're not going to have a whole lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit. It's
not a session beer.
No, it's really not. It's good as a one-off, but I would not want a second. I don't need a second one of those because anyway.
Okay, let's move on to talking about other things in the world.
Because the world is so much fun on the 18th of January, 2025. Because what happens in 2 days?
Donald Trump becomes president, and
the world's going to change.
To his credit, he has actually told Netanyahu stop this war in Gaza, and which is something that Biden would not do. So. I don't love Trump, but thumbs up.
No, we don't.
Thumbs up for stopping it. Yeah. Talk about seizing Greenland, Canada, and Panama, and the bullshit justifications of we want it and we need it. That is the Nazi argument, and you take a good hard look at yourselves. But let's move on from that.
I mean, it's just a case of he's throwing out words because he knows it's going to get headlines for him.
Going back to fascists behaving badly that we started the show with, I do think that his people know that what they're doing with extracting all the fossil fuels as fast as possible is going to lead to those northern latitudes being much more valuable than they are today. And that's why they want them. But just because you want something doesn't mean, it's the Bible. You shouldn't covet your neighbour's ass.
Anyway. Wider guided drones.
This is really exciting.
Yeah, the Russians are going and saying, you know what, these bastards are keep jamming our radio signals to our drones, and so let's just load them up with a really long optic fiber.
Yeah. Look, as an electronic warfare enthusiast, I've been watching this war saying, why aren't they using electronic warfare to knock out these drones? And obviously, the Ukrainian EW has actually advanced to the point where the Russians are now, it's a huge weight penalty on a drone to be carrying a spool, a kilometres long spool of fibre optic
10 to 20
cable. Yeah,
10 to 20 kilometres.
Yeah, I think 6 was what I saw as affected. But anyway, enormous weight penalty, and all of that weight penalty is coming out of the payload the drone can carry. But it does show that electronic warfare is actually functioning and is forcing drones back into 1950s technology. So that's interesting, and the next thing to see is the drones that go out to cut the cables of the other drones.
Which is where one of the YouTube things I saw from the British Armed Forces was saying, we should start building drones with titanium blades that in order to go out and cut these fiber optic cables. And it's going,
I'm not sure you actually want to use the blades. I think you'd have another sort of cover.
It's also going back to bloody ancient Chinese bloody kite flying. Saying, I'll just have a kite that has glass glued to the string to cut other people's string. And that's essentially, when did they invent that? Bloody 2,000 years ago? 1,600 years ago? I don't know.
Mash Patat has made a very good point that the price difference between a drone with a kilometre of fibre optic cable and one that doesn't have that is enormous, and that's a very good point. But this is the give and take of offense versus defense. So
Shotgun drones, yes, I have seen a little bit of them and thinking, yeah, well, you're flying around with a shotgun and trying to shoot other drones out of the sky with a shotgun. That's weird. I mean, we're getting into bloody Shadowrun / Cyberpunk territory.
Finally,
yeah.
I mean, we just need some dragons to come back.
Right.
I think we're both going to be orcs, though, Rob.
And
we can deal with being orcs.
And Arnold Schwarzenegger to be president. It might be a bit old these days, but I mean, in the 80s, boys and girls, when Shadowrun came out, late, I think it was 89, they did have a line in there saying there was a change to the US Constitution allowing non-citizens to become president, and Arnold Schwarzenegger became president in 2011, I think it was. So this is going back a long time, but yeah, it was a thing. So yeah, in the original Shadowrun. When the dragons came back, and elves and dwarves and orcs and trolls and everything else. All right, German tank ammunition. Tell us about that, John.
I saw some YouTube video, I think it was Red Effect, where they were talking about how there's lots of videos emerging of destroyed German Leopards in...
Leopard 2s, I'm sure.
Yeah, Leopard 2s in Ukraine. But despite the fact the tank's been blown up, the ammunition hasn't cooked off, because German superior chemistry is making their main ammunition insensitive, which, you know, it's a funny phrase, insensitivity in munitions. It's like, oh, why are they all so woke? But
it's like inflammatory means the same as inflammable.
Yeah.
Sorry, inflammable means the same as flammable.
But it's a very interesting thing that instead of, like, the Abrams has some design penalties on it because it has full ammunition separation. If you can make the ammunition so it won't cook off when it gets hit, then you can take out those design penalties. So that's interesting, and I think worth us thinking about. But yeah.
All right, Sweden buying more tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Moving from 110 on the boards of Leopard 2s up to 154, and putting on the longer gun of the A8 spec.
Yeah, just, you know, I find myself arguing. People on TikTok keep saying, oh, tanks are obsolete. It's like, if they're so obsolete, why does everyone want them, need them? Why is the whole Ukraine war predicated on when the Russians ran out of tanks? Tanks are not obsolete. And it's like, you know... Oh, yeah, the tanks can get destroyed by drones. It's like, yeah, how do unprotected infantry go against the drones? Not well. So protection matters. Mobility, protection, firepower.
Mobility and firepower is a big thing. All right, North Koreans using bait and marksmanship to down drones in Kursk.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. Apparently the North Koreans have got this doctrine to deal with the Ukrainian drone operators. And it involves ranges of 10 meters, which is way too close. But basically, a North Korean has to jump out and say, ooh, I'm over here. And then the drone will zoom in on him. And then the other two Ukrainians in their fire team, the other two North Koreans in their fire team will use their well-drilled marksmanship to knock down the drone. And I'm all in favour of good marksmanship, but...
it sounds really like Red Dawn from 1984 with Patrick Swayze and Patrick Dillon and all the others, Jennifer Grey and all the others running around out there.
I would prefer my Gepard to be blatting it from 1,000 metres myself.
But for low-level conflict, I mean, you got to work with those. All right, boxers.
So... I actually had a funny moment when I was talking to an Australian Army Lieutenant Colonel the other day, as we do sometimes. And I said, why haven't we seen Boxer in Ukraine? And his eyes glazed in a weird way. And he's like, that's a really good question. But apparently the Germans are sending Boxer, which, for those who don't know, is an incredibly huge...
It's bigger than an Abrams.
Yeah, incredibly huge 8-wheel, or 4 wheels down either side, big balloon wheels, and Just think the land ship in Star Wars, the Jawas were driving around.
No, I was thinking more of the new clone army, clone army forces.
Anyway, they're enormous vehicles, but they do have a modular rear bay that's basically like a utility vehicle, and the RCH-155 has a 155mm howitzer in the back. And for artillery work, you don't actually need to be bashing around on paddocks. You can just be driving up the road to the nearest, sealed road. Because, when you're talking, 25, 35 kilometres range, depending on the rounds you're using, that's fine. And being able to shoot and scoot is incredibly important in the era of counter-battery fire.
Yeah. Oh, good. Saying when you want to be able to get your 3 rounds off in 20 seconds or whatever else, and being back on the road within a minute and have all 3 of those rounds landing at the same time. It's pretty impressive technology.
Yeah. Anyway, apparently they're sending regular boxes with the howitzer ones to use their 30mm cannons for anti-drone protection.
Ooh.
So that's an interesting approach to what box is good for, but also the fact that if you've got a 30mm cannon with a proximity fused round, drones aren't the same problem that they are if you don't have that. But yeah,
also got the radar to bloody detect them.
Yeah.
All right. Ceasefire in Gaza.
But
at what cost? All right. Now
let's give Donald Trump some credit here, because we're mean about him all the time. But
as we should be.
Biden has refused to do what he should have done, which is tell the Israelis, you will not get any more weapons or bombs if you keep this war going. And the incoming Trump administration has said to the Israelis, you have to cut this out. This war has to end.
I got 2 wars going on, and I got to stop one of them.
Yeah,
and yours is the easiest.
And according to Consortium News, who are a amazing independent journalism, Robert Parry, who died a couple of years ago, founded it, and it is still a great resource.
Was he the one that was killed by the CIA with his?
No, but he was friends with that guy.
Okay.
Anyway, so Consortium News is reporting, and I will take their words for it, that basically Trump's envoy was flying into Jerusalem saying, you guys need to meet me in the Prime Minister's office immediately to sort this out. And Bibi's people are like, oh, it's the Sabbath, we're not going to be there. And he's like, yeah, you are. This is going to happen. And the ceasefire may or may not be worth anything or any good, but we will give credit where it is due and where it is fair, and ending the war is better than the war going on, because there are women and children
being blown up and murdered because the Israeli hardliners just say, well, they're not really people. We can just get rid of them in order to have all that land.
Anyway, we're always in favour of wars ending.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Mad Mike.
Now, John sent me this article about Mad Mike this Mike Pizzullo, who was the
Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs in Australia.
Basically, the super department that had been set up by the previous Liberal government in Australia. He got given an award, and then a couple of years later, I think it was last year, they said, you know what? You have abused your power and position and everything else, and we're going to take this AO or whatever he was given away from him because he had, Order of Australia or whatever it was, because he'd abused his position for what it was. And so now he's writing for the
Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is the and our friend Al Palazzo writes for ASPI. So, the trouble is, ASPI started as a very well-founded, defence analysis organisation, and the weapons companies got into it because they provide the funding.
If you ever fly into Canberra, the first thing you'll see is all the weapons company advertising around the Canberra airport, because they own that place and that's their space, and they just want to make sure that everybody knows that Lockheed Martin and Thales and everybody else, they're the ones who who basically look after Canberra.
So our point is that Mike Pizzullo is a very significant figure, particularly in right-wing defence thinking, and he's completely nuts, is our view. Well, it's my view. I don't want to speak for Rob on this.
I made my point at the beginning of the episode when I said, well, if these right-wing people want to say we need to harden our infrastructure for defence, cyber and infrastructure and everything else, civil infrastructure, then if you want to pay for that, let's start taxing the bloody coal and gas that we give away for free.
But anyway, so some of the things Mike said that I want to dissect briefly. Trust me, we're not going to go too long, folks. So in this article, which we'll link to in the down below, in the grey space between peace and war, will we see an acceleration of cyber attacks, sabotage, including against undersea infrastructure, covert disinformation and propaganda campaigns, and other forms of intimidation by Russia and China against the democracies of the West in a bid to throw them off balance, to fracture their social cohesion and undermine the national confidence of their population? It's like, this is what our billionaires, our oligarchy is doing to us right now. This is projecting that the Chinese are going to do these things that our rulers are already doing to us. It's nuts, Rob. It's nuts. And also, I love the incredibly hidden use of will right at the start there. Will China do this? It's like...
It's asking the question. He's only asking the question, John.
He's a dickhead being a dickhead with his questions. Anyway, he's probably going to be our boss in a few months, so we're all stuffed. Okay.
Well,
and then
probably mine, but yeah.
The most offensive part of this was this paragraph. A hegemonic China, technologically dominant and militarily unchecked, with the US looking on from its hemispheric citadel, would be for Australia a more demanding overlord than Imperial Germany, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, or Soviet Russia would have been had any of them managed to achieve mastery in Eurasia. A dominant China would expect to get its way, and resisting would incur high costs. Now, comparing China in 2025 to Japan in 1939 is unbelievably offensive, because who was fighting the Japanese in 1938? It was the Chinese. They were the victims of Imperial Japan, and it is absolutely nuts. China is not bombing Darwin. China has not captured Singapore. I'm not saying China will never do any horrible thing. I have no vision of the future on that. But it is a nutty and disgusting comparison to draw. And
look, we agree with Ra with his Chinese shipping vessels. Well, actually, they're not Chinese flagged shipping vessels. They've been attacking internet cables for a while now. And look, it's I love the article you sent me the other day of about a Chinese university trying to patent the cable cutting undersea cable cutting technology, saying, just in case for safety reasons we need to cut only undersea cables, that we should patent this technology and be able to do it whenever we feel like. They're going.
But also, the Australian prime ministers have had a constant hard-on for sending submarines out to cut cables and do listening operations. This is what countries do to each other.
They just don't like it when they do it to us.
I guess so. I don't know.
I mean,
yeah,
we're racist in that way.
Mm-hmm.
These people from
how long have we been going with this podcast, Rob?
2 hours and 3 minutes.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Anyway.
We feels like you've been rambling on ages and ages, John, but I think we've come to the end. And we want to say about the Crusader, we didn't like it.
Yeah, we think, I'm particularly, look, your grandparents fought in World War II. My grandparents...
No, my grandparents fought in World War One.
Oh, okay.
My uncles fought in World War II.
Yeah. My grandparents fought in World War II, and it makes me so angry that this piece of crap was something that they were sent out to fight with when they were incredibly capable of building better vehicles, as we've seen, we got proof of, and it makes me mad, this sort of stuff. But, yeah. Anyway, I would really want to thank everyone who's watched this show. It's
46. Does that mean 46 people are watching us right now?
Not right now. That's the
okay.
total
that's right.
number. But yeah.
Wow. And where do we end up with the poll? Come on, tell us the poll.
55% still say the Crusader was better than people say, and
what was the other option?
It was like someone should have been arrested. An unforgivable crime.
45% said an unforgivable crime.
Anyway,
after 20 votes.
As believers in democracy, we accept your verdict. We just disagree with it. But yeah, all right. It's been fun. It is always fun. We thank you so much for everyone who's watched us live. We thank everyone who's watched us when we're not live. And
to the young fella at the bakery who always asks me about the T-shirt, mate, thanks very much for asking, because I really appreciate recognition in the actual world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And as we say, we're looking forward to Cairns in a couple of months' time. and I'm sure we'll all have a great time there. So, and thank you so much for everybody jumping online and putting in the comments. And look, I got to say the video of the Crusader running around in the desert, that was freaking awesome. Yeah.
Even if its gun was incredibly high explosive and people just falling over anywhere that ram fell, that was astonishing.
That's movie magic.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. And Viscount Nuffield could make the movie magic work for him. That's the takeaway.
Cans and cans, you bet. Love it.
Lots of cans and cans. Come along.